Quando você ouve um podcast, está procurando entretenimento ou conhecimento, certo? E se você procura por desempenho e qualidade para o seu veículo, qual a sua escolha? Os amortecedores Motorcraft têm tecnologia Ford e oferecem uma condução suave para uma viagem tranquila e segura. Escolha a confiabilidade dos amortecedores Motorcraft, válidos para a linha K, Fiesta, EcoSport e muito mais. Quando terminar seu podcast, é só acessar a loja da Ford no Mercado Livre e experimentar a diferença.
Hello, Duke fans. Episode 625 of the DBR, the Duke Basketball Roundup. I'm Jason Evans here for your listening enjoyment. By the way, I'm going to start off by saying, I know my friend Donald says the audio sounded fine. I think my audio was terrible in the last episode, and I apologize to all of you. My microphone is fixed. You can hear me just fine, clear as a bell now. Donald Wine is with me. Donald, how you doing today?
My mic sounds great.
Yeah, you sound awesome.
So let's hope it keeps going.
Exactly. This is a special episode, folks. We will not be talking about the transfer portal at all. No transfer portal conversation here. No recruiting, no NBA draft rumors. This episode is about history, important history. And joining us to help talk about it is our longtime friend, Sam Klein. Sam, welcome back to the podcast.
Person, I think, who's clocked the most episodes recorded with bad audio. So therefore, I have some, I don't know, industry knowledge here. Jason, right. You sound fine.
Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate that. Also joining us, it is a crowded episode of the DBR podcast today. Joining us is Brian Reckless. Am I pronouncing that last name correctly? Reckless?
Yes, you are.
There we go. Brian is a video producer at Duke University, and he was tasked as part of the Duke 100th celebration. Brian has produced a documentary about a half hour long on the history of the Blue Devil. Brian, what an amazing project. All three of us are going to be asking you questions about this. I want to start by saying, folks, if you have not seen this documentary, it is readily available on YouTube. I think if you just search for Blue Devil documentary, it's like the first thing that comes up. And Brian, it's a ton of fun. It's a trip down nostalgia, history lane for all of us, but included with tons of things that I had no idea about. Tell me how the idea for this came about. I'll start with that. Who generated the notion that we should go back and look at the history of the mascot?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. Big fan of the podcast. Really excited to be on. I started at Duke just over a year ago, and this project was kind of like had been brought up and put on the back burner and just wasn't moving forward. And I was like, well, if we want to do that, I would definitely love to do that. Like, let's go. Like, I was very excited about pushing it forward. And like you said, this is part of the...
By the way, really quick, can I jump in and ask, are you a Dookie? Or, what was your excitement for it?
Well, I guess I'm going to just go ahead and say this because people could find out on LinkedIn if they looked in. I am a lifelong Duke fan. My earliest memory is Christian Laettner's shot, sitting with my family, them erupting when it happened. I did happen to need a college degree, and I went to a different school that is not far away from Duke.
Don't worry, you're forgiven.
But I will say my bona fides are good. I was there. I graduated from that school in 2009, and a bad thing happened that year, and it was a terrible thing, but I feel like I was gifted something the following year. So the same couch where I unfortunately watched the game in April of 2009, I sat on in April of 2010 and watched a wonderful moment.
You went to Carolina and stayed a Duke fan?
That is correct.
Wow.
Behind enemy lines. I love it.
Can we change the whole topic of the interview? What's that like?
You don't talk about basketball as much around your friends as you would if you're at a school where you're cheering.
Like I had friends in school because we're about the same age. Because I graduated in 2011, and I remember I had friends freshman year who grew up in Maryland, where I'm from, and they came. I remember one girl on my floor who had Maryland sweatpants, and she'd wear them around, and I'd be like, "You can't do that anymore. It's not like that." So. Anyway, we don't have to totally derail.
Well, wait.
Man, props to you.
I have to say, I grew up a Carolina fan. As folks, I think, who've heard this podcast over the years know, my dad, my uncle, my grandfather all went to UNC. I mean, a couple of them are distinguished alumni of Carolina. My whole life, I was a Carolina fan. I picked Duke, and like from that moment on, I was like, yeah, UNC, you're the back burner, baby. So, Brian, I am super impressed that you've been able to maintain your Duke fandom.
Well, it set in early and it stuck.
So first of all, I grew up a Michigan fan, so I think all four of us on the pod grew up as fans of something else, except for you. And maybe we had different paths becoming Blue Devil fans, but we're all here.
I'm lifelong. I'm lifelong. Don't get this mistaken. I was never a Maryland fan.
Okay.
We went to Georgetown games occasionally when I was a kid, but I was not a Georgetown fan. I was a Duke fan. Let the record reflect.
Shout out John Thompson. He's cool. Okay. So back to the conversation of the Blue Devil, which is why we're all here. Different types of documentaries come out, right? You have the 30 for 30s, and then you have like the ones that you saw like in the 1990s at your local public library. What was your inspiration for this particular documentary? Because I feel like it's a little bit in the middle, right? It gives you the educational part. There's a couple of funny aspects of things in just telling a story, but it felt like more of a presentation as part of something bigger. Tell me about that.
Yeah, sure. This project ballooned. So we were supposed to do like a 5 to 7 minute project, just telling the history of the mascot, which was kind of supposed to be like, tell you about the French soldiers that it was named after, maybe interview one or two Blue Devils, be done with the whole thing. It was supposed to just be part of a short piece for the Duke Centennial that we're celebrating right now. As a Duke fan, it quickly became something I was really excited about going longer and more in depth in. And then we talked to Lisa Wiestart, who works for Duke's alumni engagement office, and she was the first female Blue Devil. If you watch the documentary, she is heavily featured in the documentary. And she has been trying to create this network of former Blue Devil mascots. And so she just kept bringing new people to me and was like, well, we could talk to this person and we could talk to this person. And so the more people I talked to, the more stories I realized were there, the more I realized this needs to be bigger and longer. I feel like it could have been even longer than it ended up being, but we kind of wanted to stick under a half an hour just to make it pretty digestible for a YouTube audience, because we knew we were going to be kind of pretty quickly going public with that.
Of course, you're talking about 100 years of history, right? Or even, honestly, it's 102 years of history since the Blue Devil predates the changing of Trinity College to Duke University. How hard was it when you're gathering this history and trying to put it in chronological order? What were some of the more difficult things to find? I know you may have had some stuff from the 20s and 30s, but like, how did you fill in the gaps, or at least how did you try?
Yeah, I mean, so the big issue is we do not have any living members from the first 50 years, really, people who were alive and doing the mascot during that time. So that's definitely our most vague section of history. So we're going on pictures. I basically scrubbed through every Chanticleer from basically 1919 to as much as they've digitized up for me to look through, looking for images and different things. We work with the Val, who is the archivist at Duke. She runs the archive program for all of that. We interviewed her. She's in the documentary as well. They have some stuff, but it's pretty spotty. So those early years were really going on a handful of written documents and some pictures we found in the Duke yearbook. It's really when we get to the 60s and it started to get a little more formal, and we have people who are still around to tell us their stories. That's where it gets really exciting. And that's why we really felt like we wanted to make sure we got some of this recorded. Now that we have that is a part of the Duke record now. We aren't going to lose any more of the stuff. We're going to keep taking this down now. So I want to talk about some of the history, and I think I have a couple of questions. Then Jason is saying we may bounce around between the eras, but I want to start with the late 2000s. We talked about the transition from the real Blue Devil, the person, to the Blue Devil, the big head, which was my Blue Devil, right? That's the one that I grew up loving and was in school with.
In the late 2000s, the big head costume went away, and we went to the costume that we have today. It's a little bit more muscular and most notably a smaller head. The documentary talked about the transition, but didn't really highlight the reasons behind the change. So can you tell us why Duke ultimately decided to make the switch in costumes?
Yeah, well, I think if you asked any of the people, and Sam, you can maybe tell me this, any of the people who wore the big head, I think it was probably it needed to be replaced due to stench. Everything I've heard about anyone who wore the big head costume is that it smelled truly awful. And this is from people who are wearing it in 1991. And it was the same head in 2008 when you were wearing it, Sam, I believe.
I would describe it as, by the time it got to me in fall of 2008, there were a few of them. We had multiple copies the same way they do now. And say that it smelled bad is an enormous understatement. I mean, the thing was so like you ever like walk down the street in New York City on garbage day and you think, what have they been cooking? You know, like it's so much worse than that. It was disgusting. And the whole thing, they describe, one of the guys described it in the video that that it was like a construction helmet with the foam head like attached to the construction helmet, and all the adjustments had all broken. So imagine like wearing a fairly simple helmet with like the plastic adjuster where you can like pick the size with the little nubs. But all those things were broken, so we had to like retape it all the time, which means that the thing was covered in all this old sticky tape. Every time I got out of that thing, I had to take a shower immediately.
Yeah, so I think the costume was due for a change, and then I think my understanding is they wanted something sleeker, just like more something more modern feeling, and you do see a lot of mascots heading that direction. I will say, Donald, I'm with you. The big head it's the one that struck my heart first, and it's the one I have the most fondness for.
Well, I think most Blue Devil fans, at least like if you think about just the years in which each of these mascots has been in circulation. You said that the big head started in 1980. Is that right? So,
yep.
For any of us who are formative internet users, the big head is the Blue Devil. So, I'm partial to it. That's the only suit that I ever wore.
I will speak up in favor of the smaller head because I think that the big head, Sam, you would know better than anyone else, but from watching the documentary and from my own observations, the primary concern of the guy who was wearing the big head was that the big head not fall off. Keeping that thing on, limited your ability to move, your ability to see, and all that other kind of stuff. The smaller head, the Blue Devil can be a little more active. He's a little more alive. He can move around, And so I think that's why I like the little head. I'm not going to say I like it more than the big head. The big head is iconic. It's what I grew up with. But I see why they did this.
It's like the Dark Knight. It's like the Dark Knight Rises when he has to turn his head. He's like, "Can you make my costume modify it so I can turn my head left?" Like that sort of thing.
Limiting factor actually is that the head was so big that you can't raise your arms above it unless you have super. I mean, I don't have long arms. I'm 5'6" and I have the arms of a smaller than 5'6" person. But if you try to raise your hands above the head, like I could. If I raise my hands like all the way up, I could cover the eyes. So like if something embarrassing happened, I could put my hands all the way forward and cover my eyes. But short of that, like, so you can't you couldn't possibly do a handstand. One, the head would fall off, and two, you'd be just standing on the head. And it wasn't strong enough to hold a human person. So there were a lot of challenges, but I wasn't sure because I remember, Brian, that they had even told me at the beginning of like the season before that they were thinking about changing it. Do you know any more about what the process was for that, or how they went about redesigning it?
My understanding is they kind of workshopped a bunch of different ideas. I'm sure they went through like a marketing department, like a whole branding kind of company, presented several ideas, and they picked the one that they felt was going to last the longest. And I do like the small head. I think it's probably only a few years away from it's a natural time for us to move into a new era.
Look, as I mentioned, Dark Knight Rises is one of the greatest films I've ever seen, but my favorite film is The Dark Knight. Doesn't mean that Dark Knight Rises wasn't good. Just means that Dark Knight is my Batman movie, so to speak. Okay, we were talking about the heads, right? And I wanted to get to my next question, and that is the most seamless, ubiquitous thing that is a part of the Duke Blue Devil costume, and that is the headband. We get to the headbands at the end of the film. I'm a fan of headbands in general because it keeps sweat off my face. But especially when the Blue Devil, since it's such a huge part of the costume, talk a little bit more about how that came to be. I know you kind of got to it with it being on the cape, and then eventually moving it to the front. But like when you looked at the room that has all of the old ones there, like what were some of the ones that stood out to you? And I'm sure some are R-rated, but that's what they are. But are there some out there that you're like, oh man, this one like didn't see the light of day, but if you get into this room, there's like a wall that has all the like rejected headbands. Tell me about that.
I would like to point out, by the way, that we are allowed to swear and use explicit language. We just put a little E next to the podcast episode. So, Brian, if you got a really good one that wasn't allowed, let it rip.
We'll throw the E up there. Yeah, this is E for everyone.
I don't think I saw there was any swearing because I think all the mascots knew that would be a cross line. It's like we can't walk out with the F-bomb on the headband. Like it's clearly going to send me back to there. The ones that seem to get it are if they were mocking the institution on a like academic level. So there's a free degree !1-800 NC State.
I remember when Adam had that because
awesome.
He actually made it out. He used my class. He actually made it out, I think, for warm-ups for like a hot second. And then all of a sudden he went back and then all of a sudden it was a new one. I was like, ah, yeah. But that was one where they were like, back in change.
Yeah. One that stuck with me that's really silly, and I think it's I don't actually know what era it was from, but was for Clemson. It was who's Clem's daughter? So Clem's son, who's Clem's daughter? Which I don't think that got rejected, but it's just like a fun way to think about it. Honestly, they didn't talk about a lot of them getting rejected. I think most of the Blue Devil mascots were smart enough to know how to be just right up to the line of what is acceptable. And that's like part of the fun I got when I talked to all these different people who were the mascot, was that they loved to toe the line and put the toe over the line and then get pushed back a little bit. But they usually had a good sense of where it was. And that's part of what makes them good at that, being a mascot, is kind of being playful right up to the edge of it being inappropriate, but knowing they're there to make the environment fun, not offensive.
Hey, Brian, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, when the Blue Devil looked like a clown, we will ask Brian all about that after this quick commercial break. Okay, Brian, we're back from the break talking about the Blue Devil documentary. We're here with Brian Reckless, the producer, director, I guess. What every title possible. The whole thing is you, right?
Director, writer.
No, I mean, no, the whole thing's not me. My whole department was very involved, but I did direct it. I conducted all the interviews and stuff like that. So
it sounds like a Brian Reckless production, if you ask me.
That's not fair. I definitely, if any of my coworkers listen to this, I'm so appreciative for all the work they did. So
yes,
yeah,
absolutely. I understand completely. But I want to ask you a couple questions about things I saw in the documentary. Some of the stories that are in it that I think are really interesting. And most of it goes back to the early days, the 20s and 30s. You had a number of pictures there, and you described the Blue Devil literally as looking like a clown. I cannot disagree with you. I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, who thought this was a good idea? How essential do you think the outfit is to the mascot? Like, would this character, is this character beloved because he's the Blue Devil, or is it the outfit? Is it the way they look that really make them something special?
Man, the great question.
Because I got to tell you, man, that clown outfit would not be something special.
I was going to say, I so appreciate the effort and the boldness that went into dressing the way they did in the 20s and 30s, which I really do think was, hey, someone has a clown outfit, I'll put that on, and I'll put these horns on my head, and now I'm the Blue Devil, I guess. Like that seems like the amount of logic that went into that decision for them. And I think that's fun and exciting, and I think they were just trying to figure out something to do. I can't imagine. We're talking about the mid-20s. We just came out of World War One. They just are finally getting back to football. Something I didn't realize was Trinity had eliminated football as a school because they thought it was too aggressive. But then basically when World War One ended, they were like, we need to bring this back because our students are depressed because they just went through a world war that they had to watch happen. And so they brought football back as like an entertainment thing. And I think people were just really excited about it. And so they were going to figure out a way to do it. It would not be iconic the way it is now if it was still a clown costume or even what it was in the 50s and 60s. The nature of the big head mascot being so distinct and very interesting looking and matching Duke's rise in basketball to becoming a powerhouse in the modern ESPN era. I know that Duke was really good previously as well, but going to all those Final Fours and winning the championships in 91, 92, I think that's the reason it became iconic. And I do think it has to do with it was distinct. Like it is not a tiger or a dog of some sort or something that so many different schools have similar mascots because there's only so many animals. But the Blue Devil is unique. There are the Sun Devils in Arizona State, but like very few people have something that looks like the Blue Devil.
I love it. That's a great answer, man. Hey, one of the best stories that I enjoyed from the documentary was that back in the 20s and 30s, they used a real pitchfork, which just seems like a really bad idea. Tell me the story for folks who haven't seen the documentary. This will be a tease that they will get the story in the documentary, but I want you to tell me the story of why they stopped using a real pitchfork. And yes, the story is exactly as you might imagine.
And it's wonderful because it does involve UNC as well. So the story is in the 30s, I think mid 30s, somewhere in there. Blue Devil was goofing off with the pitchfork. I can't speak to intention because we only have a newspaper article about this, so we don't know what the intention of the mascot was at the time, but did throw the real pitchfork in the air. It struck a UNC band member and apparently sent them to the hospital. Briefly, they apparently got out of the hospital without major injury. But I think that Blue Devil did not know where that line was, apparently, and decided to just find out exactly where it was by literally throwing a pitchfork over the line.
Checking notes. Stabbing someone with pitchfork, no. Everything else, towing line. Got it.
Right.
Got it.
I was going to say the thing I loved about that part of the documentary was when you are telling that story, you want to represent UNC being a part of it. And so we see a ram, we see, one of the UNC Rams. And I was like, as the story's being told, I'm like, oh my God, did he kill the ram?
Jason, my niece was watching a draft of this at Christmas when they were in town. I was showing it to my family. She had that exact same reaction, burst out in tears because she assumed that the mascot had murdered a ram and was very sad. It took several minutes to console her and be like, no, that was just a picture. That's unrelated.
I love it. Yeah. All right. So my last question for you, the documentary obviously contains a few stories of funny things that happened to people who wore the costume. I mean, I'm sure there are a million of those. I want your favorite that you heard. And then from the documentary, and then give me one that you didn't include in the film. Maybe you weren't allowed to include. We've talked about the fact that we are allowed to be a little more racy than maybe you could have, putting together a documentary that's an official Duke production, just between friends, man. Tell me. So give me a story from the film, and then give me the story that you couldn't tell in the film that you wish you could have.
Oh, man. Honestly, I don't want to set it up like I have all these like illicit stories that were held out because that's not really accurate. There were lots of fun things. I think even the Blue Devils knew where that line was. A fun story is about one of the new small heads and I'm not going to say the name of the person because I think they might not want this. But one of the things about the small head costume is that you don't have to be as tall to be in it. And this was a bigger thing that once that happened, many more women started becoming the Blue Devil. And as you see in the documentary, there are multiple women that have recently been the Blue Devil. And I think that's a great thing. It really like expands the amount of people who get to show their school spirit through this role, which is very cool. One of the women, her first time out, was choosing which version of the costume to wear, and chose one that she did not realize would accentuate her figure in a way that made the Blue Devil, the character, look large-chested in a way that apparently was flagged immediately at the first basketball game she attended for that, and they were like, "We need to figure out which suit to put you in because that one's not the right one." So that didn't end up in the documentary there. Man, I'm trying to think of stories that made it into the documentary that was my favorite. I think what I liked better than any single story was the energy that each of the people I talked to had about the mascot. Everybody who was a mascot was so enthusiastic about life, and they are just like fun people who are just happy to have done this thing and just really enjoyed being a part of something. And many of them did it anonymously. Sam, I'm curious, was it a secret for you when you were doing
It was supposed to be. I remember they told me I was supposed to tell people that I was an equipment manager for the cheerleading team, and I feel like most of my friends figured it out because I don't know, they were all Duke students. They were not dumb, so they were like, "Oh, you go to every men's and women's basketball game, huh? And you never stand in line." Interesting. And also, like, half the time that you're there, we can't see you. We can see all the rest of our friends. So it's a little bit tough to hide from like other students when they actually know you. And like in my case, and I imagine in the case of many of the other Blue Devils, when you're a really big fan, which I think you sort of naturally have to be to do the thing, one of the things was like, "Oh, well, you're a big fan of the team, but like you never like go to the games with us, like why, you know?" So it was technically a secret. I couldn't tell you how many of my friends like actually knew about it.
I will say I was headline monitor 2003, 2004. Jason was the first of the headline monitor. We need to come up with our own hood, by the way, Jason.
Yeah.
Everyone's got all these other hoods and brotherhoods and sisterhoods. We need one.
So the
But I digress.
because all the students hate the way that you impose rules on them.
It will involve
Hey, they
a
love
bullhorn
me
for sure.
They love
Yeah.
me.
But the funny thing is the Blue Devils that were, there's obviously rotation 3 or 4. The Blue Devils that were Blue Devils when I was in school, they all figured out a way to mess with me during the game in a way that they wouldn't tell me, or it was revealed to me who they were underneath the costume. Because I'd sit there and be like, "Hey, Adam, Jonas, Mac, Charlie, is that you?" And of course they can't say anything, but they would mess with my headband in a way. They all had their signature way of messing with me, whether it's like, flicking my forehead or pulling my headband. And I would know exactly who it was, because the reason why is because we did some chants and some coordinated things that we decided we were going to involve everyone. And that included the Blue Devil. And it was a way for us to communicate with them about what was about to happen, and not me having to do it like 3 or 4 times because, they switched out at halftime and the other one's like, what are you talking about? I thought we were going to do this, in the second half. So I think it's interesting how it was a complete secret. And then there were some through different ways. They were kind of like, "Hey, it's not, I can't tell you it's me, but I'm going to do the same thing until you figure it out."
That's awesome.
All right, we're going to now, Donald and I are handing control over to Sam, a former Blue Devil himself. Sam, you can give us stories. You can ask Brian questions. The floor is yours, sir.
I have one question for Brian, and I was curious if there were themes that you picked up on. I know at the end of the video, everyone talks about how appreciative they were that they did it, and the school spirit. But were there other themes that you picked up on from people, or like sort of similar stories that people like to tell that were sort of hard to get through in the format that you presented?
It's a good question. this isn't directly a theme, but a thing that I definitely found interesting was while everybody had a very similar enthusiasm for Duke and a high level of school spirit, there's a pretty big variety in the type of person and the career paths that people have, the former mascots have taken. I mean, in the film, we have a professor, we have someone who works for Duke Alumni Engagement, we have a librarian, there are doctors who have done it before, there's apparently a minister who did it in the 80s, or 80s, 90s, somewhere in that range, people in marketing. It's what you would expect from any cross-section of Duke students, but also that they aren't necessarily in their daily life as big as they were in that moment. There were multiple people who, I think there were plenty of people who do the mascot because they have a big personality and they're like, this naturally is me. I just put the suit on and go out there and do what I want to do. I think there are other people who put the suit on and it gives them permission to act a fool and just go have fun and be bigger than they feel like they can be in their everyday life. One of the female Blue Devils talked about it giving her more confidence in rooms. She was in STEM, and she would go into a room full of men who don't necessarily have the highest appreciation for women in a STEM field, and she had a higher level of confidence because she said, I'm the Blue Devil. You walk into a room, you're the most important person in that room, and you just act confident and you just do it. And so she gained that confidence from that role. And so it was just great to hear from people from all different personalities that they did have a same experience. Once the head went on, they became that person, that character.
It's cool. I think I have a similar approach to what you were just as you were describing it. I was thinking, is that how I felt? I feel more. I'm a boisterous person. I feel probably more like the Blue Devil on average than most people do. But when you talk about it being empowering, it's crazy how, when you go to a sporting event or you go to any sort of official function of any kind, just as a regular person, there's all kinds of rules, right? Whether they're explicit or implicit about where you're supposed to go and what you're allowed to do. When you're I don't know if this is exclusively to the Blue Devil, this would be any sports mascot. If you're in the suit and you're in the arena, you can do almost anything you want short of physical assault. If you're not touching anyone, you can do anything you want, and no one's gonna say anything to you about it. Wasn't that funny? So walking through the concourse, I remember because if you've ever been to a game in Cameron, you know that the concourses are too small and it's very crowded. If you're walking in there at halftime or right before the game, there's it's too crowded, you can barely move. If you walk through there as the mascot, it's the whole thing parts for you. It's as if you smell as bad as the helmet does. Because everyone wants to get, but they all want to say hi and give you a high five and stuff. So it's very empowering, and all of a sudden it's all eyes on you, but they don't know that it's you.
Well, Sam, like you mentioned, we're all boisterous guys when it comes to Duke basketball, especially, right? We're not the type that goes to a game and sits on our hands. But as the mascot, you couldn't talk. So was that difficult for you to go through a game? I know you still get to be energetic and stuff, but there's points where I'm sure I would be in that mascot and, someone makes a loud dunk or a three to clinch the game or something like that, or to beat Carolina, and you would want to let out a primal yell. Was that hard for you to do?
Well, I have news for you. If you're in Cameron and something awesome happens and you scream, no one knows that you scream.
No one hears you.
It's
like in space. It's like an alien. No one can hear you scream.
You can't do anything. Yeah. During the game, if something awesome happened, I often would usually I was sitting on the ground during play, and I might jump up to celebrate something. I would scream during that because everyone was doing the same thing. So you wouldn't know. And the thing, at least the head that I wore would muffle the sound a little bit anyway. So no one could hear when I screamed. It's when you were walking around and someone would ask you for a picture. I would notice if I had to take a picture with a bunch of people that they might stand in an awkward position. And I'm one of those people that's if you get a group of people together to take a picture, I'm automatically going to start telling everyone where to stand. And I would realize oh, can't do that. can point and stuff, but the other problem is that because the visibility out of the big head was basically zero, I couldn't really tell what was going on. So usually I just let people shove me into place. And then I had like certain stances, if I was in a photo with someone, I would just put the number one finger up, and that was the only move. So
the
you
question,
are a little bit. I don't know what it's like in the new suit, but in the old suit, you were pretty limited in the set of physical things you could do.
in the film, some of the former Blue Devils talked about some of the games that they were a part of, or some of the big moments that they were able to be the Blue Devil. Sam, I have not asked you this before. What was one or two games that you were like, this is the game that I was the Blue Devil and it's going down in history? Were you through your years, were you part of anything in the championship run or anything like that?
I only did it 1 year, and it was the 2008 season when Duke lost in the second round to West Virginia, right?
West Virginia, yeah.
Was my freshman year. Not a lot awesome happened that year. It was a good year for Duke. It was not a terrible year. We made the tournament. We were competitive all year. The only team that was better than us all year was that friggin' Carolina team. And they were way better than us, but they were way better than almost everyone else until they got to the Final Four. So no, I don't think I worked at any games that were that awesome. Unfortunately. I wasn't in costume for that. You can go back, check the if interested listeners, check the 2008 game log and tell me if there's anything that stands out, and I could maybe remember if I was there.
Hey, Sam, I've got a question, and Brian, if you want to chime in on this as well, obviously, the major part of the Blue Devil is basketball, football games, sporting events, that kind of stuff. But I believe there's also sort of public appearance kind of things, going to the Duke Hospital, the Children's Wing, that kind of stuff. How important and how big a role does that play in the character and in being the mascot?
I'm curious to hear Sam's experience. I could talk probably more recently about the more recent people.
I went to a couple things in Durham. I never traveled as the mascot for like events or anything like that. Because there were a couple guys who were more experienced than me when I was doing it, and so they usually got the opportunities depending on how you view any given event. But I went to the I want to say I went to the Durham Rescue Mission once as the Duke mascot, which is not a Duke basketball game, just for so many reasons. But I think similar experience to what you might find as if you're dressed up as any, like it almost feels like you're like a clown. But you are brightening people's day. Like just consider in your own life, if you were walking down the street and you saw like anyone dressed up in a mascot suit, like how happy it makes you. The first thing I ever had to do as the Blue Devil, they told me that I got the job, and they said, come to Cameron where we keep the suit in the room with all the headbands. Try on the suit and just go walk around campus and see what happens. And
what
so
a great initiation. That is such a great.
So they were like that. I was like, what's the training? They're like, that's the only training. Just go walk around as the mascot and see what happens. And I walked from Cameron.
And don't talk.
Obviously, yeah. They're like, the only rule is like, you can't talk. Don't touch anybody inappropriately. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter. You'll sort of figure it out as you go. And I walked from Cameron to like main West Campus across the Bryant Center walkway and then back to Cameron. It took me a long time because everyone who stopped, I love it. This is like when we were still like most people still had flip phones. So you could take a picture on a phone, but it wasn't like a good picture.
Right.
But a bunch of people like stopped to take photos with me. They like asked to like do cheers with me. There's like, tour guides like walking across campus with tour groups. And oh, the Blue Devil, you're here. Like, it's so great to see you. You put the thing on and it's like all of a sudden everybody wants to hang out with you. Which I'm not going to go to a dark place, but that doesn't happen to me every day. Like not everyone wants to. Sometimes people want to hang out with me, but not inherently.
I want to go to shooters with the Blue Devil on. See how quick that cover gets eliminated.
It would be out of control if the mascot ever appeared at shoot. It would be completely out of control.
It'd be mayhem. He couldn't do that.
He can appear like he or she, the mascot can appear at weddings or events. Like you can, I never saw a dime from it, but I know that you can hire him out. So
Yeah, you can definitely hire the mascot out now. You can just go and like kind of fill out a request to have them show up at your event. I mean, for the appropriate fee, because
they'll put on a headband for you and everything.
Yeah, yep. I've been at some, and just as my work with the university, like I've been at some like graduate school receptions where for like incoming graduate students, and the Blue Devil shows up and they light up. Sam's right. Like these are people who are starting the next like big chapter of life. Many of them did not go to Duke for their undergrad. They're here just to do their next chapter of learning, and they love to see the Blue Devil. You see people just run over with their phone to get their picture with the Blue Devil immediately. It really lights up a room.
Every time.
Well, Brian, I think that is a great place to leave our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for putting this documentary together. Again, folks, go to YouTube, check it out. It's just a incredibly nostalgic moment, I think, for all of us, just to remember all the times that we connected with this character and the scores of different people who have been a part of creating the character, including our own Sam Klein. So, Brian Reckless, thank you so much for joining us here on the Duke Basketball Roundup.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's going to do it, folks, here on the latest episode. We'll be back very, very soon with more Duke news, assuming there is news out there. By the way, you can always reach out to us, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. If you don't have that memorized, memorize it now. That is the way to reach out to me and Donald. Send us questions, send us comments. We've been getting a lot of them, but we try and respond to everything. I can't even count how many times people have asked, why did this guy transfer? Why did that guy transfer? Folks, we addressed this. We talked about it several times. So stop asking me. Other than that,
email him every transfer question. He needs to hear them like 4 or 5 times.
Please no. Jeremy Roach is going to be very happy at Baylor. This is not an indictment of the Duke program. All right. Now you know what my email's been like lately. All right. For Donald, I'm Jason. For Sam, I'm Jason. For Brian Reckless, I'm Jason. Duke Band, play us out. Take us home. Thank you, my friend. Great job, Brian.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this.
I didn't share the best headband I ever saw. One of the reasons I wanted to become the mascot, there wasn't a chance in the conversation for this. The reason I wanted to become the mascot is that I went to the Elite Eight in 2001. I was in 6th grade. Duke played USC in Philadelphia. You can look this up.
I remember it.
And the Blue Devils head said, "We're too big for Trojans." And I was like 12. Or 11 maybe, and I didn't get it, but my older brother got it, who was with us, and my dad obviously got it, and so they saw, and to that point, I'm not even sure that I knew that the Blue Devil had that the headband said anything.
Yeah.
But he ran out, he ran by us, and my brother and my dad both saw it, and they were falling over laughing, and my brother
and you were what is this?
Yeah, and I don't get it, and my brother had to explain it to me, and I was like, that's
the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah. So that's why I became the mascot. And it turns out that the Blue Devil does have to ride all the headbands. So and then I never came up with anything funnier than that. That's a
high bar to clear, man. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So shout out to 2001 Blue Devil. You nailed it, buddy.
I wonder. I mean, so Adam Hollowell would have been there at that time, right?
Yeah, Adam was. We were freshmen. I don't know if he was at that one. I think there was a guy who graduated in 2001 that was the Blue Devil. So he might have, by seniority, been the one in. I
think they did trade off. I think Adam told me he was at the Final Four game, and the other guy was at the Arizona.
And I know he did the women's Final Fours because I went to those 2002, 2003, and he was the Blue Devil for that.
Yeah, he had a good run with 4 Final Fours.
4 in 4 years.
And women's. But not as good as Lisa, who was Christian Laettner's year. So,
right.
Yeah,
that's a really good run.
That's the best run.
All right, thanks a lot, Brian. And Sam, thank you for the post-credit outtake that we just recorded. That was excellent.